Hello and welcome to the endpoint of no return, why you need to upgrade your endpoint protection. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto Networks and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. We won't have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but we do have team members on hand from Palo Alto to respond to questions during the live event, so be sure to submit any questions that you have. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we will provide further technical assistance. Now next, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to getting started with Palo Alto. Also in there, you can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can also be found in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters, and to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. It's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll review all the questions, pick out our favorite one, and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Yvonne here from Palo Alto Networks, where she's a product marketing manager, and she's going to give us some great information on endpoint protection. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you all are too. I'm going to turn things over to Yvonne.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Endpoint of No Return, why you need to upgrade your endpoint protection. In today's webinar, we're going to take an in-depth look at endpoint security and some of the critical considerations and important decisions that you should make in order to implement the most effective endpoint security strategy for your organization. So if you're on the fence about what to do, or you've just started shopping around, I really urge you to take action soon before reaching that point of no return, where risk of catastrophe is extremely high. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we will take a look at the limitations of legacy endpoint protection and explore a more modern approach to securing endpoints. Really what that looks like, what features are needed, and what you should be looking for if you're considering upgrading your endpoint security. Specifically, we'll take a look at Cortex XDR for endpoint and how it stops endpoint attacks as they become more sophisticated. We'll also take an in-depth look into recent endpoint attacks that made headlines this year for really wreaking havoc, and how organizations can avoid disruption by ensuring that they have the most effective protection in place. So let's get right into it. Endpoints have always been and continue to be an easy target for attackers because they are the main entry point for access to systems and applications. And because the number of endpoint devices and access points continues to grow, this increases the likelihood that some endpoints are overlooked or unmanaged. Recent studies have found stats to support this. So when we are looking at attack frequency and impact, 68% of organizations have reported that one or more endpoint attacks have successfully compromised data or their IT infrastructure. And the majority of these attacks, 81%, are malware attacks with ransomware continuing to rise as lucrative payouts become a reality. And focusing on the effectiveness of endpoint security solutions, more than half of IT professionals consider endpoint attacks to be successful because their endpoint security solutions aren't effective enough at detecting attacks. So why is this happening? Why do endpoint infections continue to rise? What's going on? Simply put, legacy endpoint security has failed. The protection that antivirus tools provided 10 years ago is just no longer effective in given today's innovations. These solutions can't keep up with the advanced threats and can actually burden local systems by slowing down performance. It's actually been reported that antivirus alone only blocks about 40% of attacks. So that's really something to think about if your business is currently just relying on antivirus. And as a result, some organizations have begun to layer more tools on top of those antivirus solutions in an attempt to fix the problem. What this does is just create not only a management nightmare, but it really just adds complexity when the goal should be simplification, right? So too many ineffective silo tools usually just creates a high number of alerts and false positives that create further headaches for an already burdened IT or SOC team. And a large number of alerts that aren't correlated together into incidents really just slows down investigations and lengthens the time that attackers have to launch a successful attack on your organization. So it's pretty clear that if an organization does not have a forward-thinking, future-proof endpoint security strategy, that they will have a pretty big gap in security to deal with. Before I move on to talk about the real limits to legacy protection and what a solid strategy looks like, I want to quickly talk through the endpoint solutions that exist in the market today and some of the differences. So looking here on the left, antivirus software is really where endpoint protection got its start. It was first developed to scan files for malware in order to detect and remove computer viruses. Several decades after the introduction of antivirus software, the concept of next generation antivirus was introduced to combat new forms of malware. Next gen antivirus protection uses machine learning and behavioral threat protection to offer far more sophisticated protection than just an antivirus solution alone. So, these are seen as traditional solutions that have somewhat evolved over time to try and keep up with threats. Taking protection a step farther, the concept of an entire endpoint protection platform evolved as a combination of protection tools in addition to next-gen antivirus, including features like personal firewall, encryption, USB device control that help to better stop malware from penetrating endpoints. Endpoint protection platforms may still be seen as a modern-day security solution. They may provide the ability to detect and block malicious activity and investigate and remediate any incidents that evade protection controls. But typically this, is seen as a more modern solution when we're talking detection and response capabilities. And this is known as endpoint detection and response, or EDR. And at times you may find that EPP and EDR are used interchangeably, but detection and response just weren't features that were initially included in endpoint protection platforms. For example, Gartner still publishes a Magic Quadrant for EPP, but it considers detection and response a critical capability to be part of that quadrant and to be part of the vendor analysis. But EDR is really a critical component these days for endpoint security. The need is growing and businesses are really starting to adopt EDR technology. So a lot of you in attendance today, that may be what you're looking for. And we will certainly cover that and all of the benefits to it later on today. And finally, XDR is the newest innovation from an endpoint security perspective, but it goes beyond endpoint. It was developed to help businesses consolidate multiple security tools in order to prevent, detect, and respond to threats that involved more than just endpoint data. This is an emerging market and can be seen, like I said, as more innovative and future-proof security solution And for those of you that are currently seeking out EDR solutions, you may want to consider XDR. We'll kind of go over some of the differences and ways that it depends on your organization's needs. But EDR and XDR are really the growing and sought after endpoint security tools today because of the effectiveness that they provide in protecting your business. So what I really want to highlight here as a key takeaway are that the most modern, robust, and effective solutions have not only the best protection capabilities, but also provide some detection and response. EDR and XDR are really the most advanced, innovative options that are out there today. So we've just kind of talked through the main endpoint security solutions. And I thought it was really important to pull this quote from a recent report by analysts from Forrester. Almost 2/3 of security teams still rely on legacy endpoint security solutions like antivirus tools and endpoint protection platforms, which limit their ability to gather rich endpoint data for detection, investigation, and response. So let's think about that. 61%, almost 2/3 of decision makers noted that their organization's primary endpoint security tool was either a traditional or next-gen antivirus tool or endpoint protection platform. So relying on these legacy tools without any type of detection or response really limits their ability to gather rich endpoint data for investigations. So let's take a deeper look into, why we need a more advanced solutions for endpoint security. What are the limitations of legacy and older technology? So traditional signature-based antivirus is just ineffective against advanced threats like script-based, multi-vector, and fileless attacks, as well as advanced ransomware. There are an estimated 450,000 new instances of malware registered every single day, and another 10 million malware variants are logged each month. What this means is there are simply too many threats for signature-based approaches to identify and block them in a timely manner. Relying on outdated antivirus signatures will not help block new and evasive threats. And signature databases need to continuously be updated with the most recent signatures in order to avoid becoming outdated. These updates can actually reduce system performance. So not only are you not capturing, advanced and emerging threats, but the system performance, your end users are, not getting the most out of the performance and the network that they need. So relying on outdated antivirus signatures will not help block new and evasive threats, and older methods of scanning the environment can really affect device performance and create frustration from both network teams and the end users as constant updates and reboots are required to their devices. Security teams also complain that another challenge of traditional antivirus solutions are the high rate of false positives and IT security rate received. So much so that analysts begin to ignore low priority alerts just in order to stay above water. And, this should not be the case. Too many tools and the difficulty to manage them not only further burdens teams, but also adds gaps in coverage when seemingly the strategy is just to do the opposite. Advanced endpoint security solutions for today's and more modern security solutions use machine learning and behavioral analysis to offer far more sophisticated protection than the traditional solutions. So how can you stop today's advanced endpoint threats? You really need ironclad endpoint threat prevention. So antivirus is no longer enough. We just kind of went over the limitations there. But also adding another layer of security tools to your current arsenal is not the answer either. You need a great modern threat prevention solution that is proven to block the most sophisticated attacks on endpoints. To stay ahead of today's threat landscape, Effective endpoint protection needs to stop malware, ransomware, and phishing attacks that target endpoints. It should block not only malicious files, but also those that are new and could potentially be a threat, as well as fileless attacks. I'll discuss the features to look for in just a bit, but as a consumer, you need to require that your endpoint security vendor solution be able to stop sophisticated exploits, imminent threats, and even zero-day attacks. This means having the capability to understand and predict what may represent malicious activity before it's even deemed as such. If you're unsure of the performance of a particular vendor or what you currently have in place and if it's effective, there's a lot of third-party testing resources available, such as MITRE, attack evaluations, or AV comparatives that test the ability of security products to do what they say they will do. I highly recommend you check them out, as they use real-world tactics and techniques and procedures to test for effectiveness. So let's take a look at the modern endpoint protection requirements. These are the features and capabilities that you should be looking for when you're upgrading your endpoint security. You need the most innovative capabilities to keep up with the evolving threats that we just talked about. Next-gen antivirus solutions offer advanced endpoint security, like features like machine learning and behavioral analysis, to offer far more sophisticated protection than traditional solutions. Next-gen antivirus solutions provide advanced endpoint security by using machine learning and behavioral analysis to offer far more sophisticated protection than traditional solutions. If traditional protection measures fail to detect threats, then an endpoint agent uses local analysis and machine learning to identify the known characteristics of malware and will block attacks that are evasive. Looking at endpoint protection capabilities, integrated host firewall and disk encryption capabilities help lower security risk, meet regulatory requirements, and centrally manage endpoint security policies. Device control features allow you to manage USB access and ensure that you are able to mitigate any potential USB-related threats. And finally, implementing and managing a new tool, especially one as critical as security, can be quite intimidating, but it shouldn't be. So you want to look for a solution with a lightweight endpoint agent that provides easy deployment and a cloud-based management within a single intuitive interface. So this slide is a bit detailed, but it really illustrates how best-in-class endpoint protection works to block advanced threats based on the features that we just talked about. We get asked a lot, but how does it actually work? So I'm going to kind of talk through the different ways that attacks can be stopped. Typically, endpoint agents will provide exploit prevention, including network packet inspection that looks for new attacks based on known patterns. Technique-based exploit prevention will help stop zero-day exploits before they're even announced. And exploits are prevented by stopping the techniques themselves, requiring no prior knowledge, and allowing the agent to stop entire classes of attacks. So this is very important for those zero-day exploits. Attacks that just have not been seen before can still be stopped. Combining that with threat intelligence from malware prevention services, stops known bad files, and AI-driven local analysis provides the ability to analyze files to determine what is malware and what is not. So moving on to post-execution, some threats just can't be stopped by looking at the file itself, but a stellar endpoint security product will still be able to detect attacks after the file has executed. If some scripts are seen performing different types of activity that may be outside of the norm, seen as activity, this will be seen as activity by behavioral threat protection, and it will be shut down. Features like device control, disk encryption, and host firewall that we talked about before really combine to prevent data loss and unauthorized access. The best endpoint protection solutions should block exploits by technique, block malware files using machine learning, and stop malicious behavior. Make sure that it can block malware and exploits and look across multiple behaviors to stop attacks. So unfortunately, no one can prevent 100% of cyber attacks. The best endpoint security tools can stop over 99% of all attacks automatically, but they just simply can't block every attack. The most sophisticated and potentially most damaging attacks require detection and response. These attacks, such as insider threats or advanced persistent threats, often require analysis and manual verification from a security analyst. So while these attacks constitute a small percentage of all attacks you'll receive, they can be extremely destructive. And this is why we need to now look beyond just prevention, as detecting and responding to threats is critical. The more sophisticated attacks like insider threats, low and slow attacks, advanced persistent threats may require manual verification from a security analyst. And the only way to identify these attacks is by analyzing activity over time and across data sources with machine learning. These advanced attacks rarely can be identified in real time, and oftentimes a security analyst must try to understand the intent of the activity to determine whether or not it's malicious. So while few attacks require detection and response, like I said, they can be extremely destructive. So what are the requirements of a good detection and response solution? You should look for a solution that provides detection of attack techniques across the life cycle, including discovery, lateral movement, command and control, and exfiltration. A demonstrated ability to detect attacker techniques and tactics through MITRE attack evaluations, including tagging of MITRE attack tactics and techniques in alerts and detection rules, is key. Detection systems must also be highly customizable based on the specific needs of your environment. This involves supporting both custom and predefined detection rules. To reduce response times, choose security tools that provide a complete picture of incidents with rich investigative details. They should simplify investigations by automatically revealing the root cause, sequence of events, and threat intelligence details of alerts from any source. Customizable incident scoring also allows you to focus on events that matter the most to you and your organization. So by grouping alerts into security incidents, you can reduce the number of individual events to investigate and speed your incident response times. So let's take a look at endpoint detection and response with Cortex XDR for endpoint. It will provide you with best-in-class endpoint protection features that we just talked through, with the addition of detection and response capabilities needed to investigate those potential 1 to 2% of threats that may elude your defenses. Oftentimes, the only way to identify these attacks is by analyzing activity over time and across data sources with machine learning. By combining rich data and analytics, you can detect the tactics and techniques used by advanced adversaries. You can also hunt for threats and get full visibility to investigate and respond to incidences. Endpoint detection and response has really become a critical component of any endpoint security strategy, because there's simply no better way to detect an intrusion by monitoring the target environment being attacked, and the telemetry collected by an EDR platform enables full triage and investigation. So let's take a look at an example scenario that is pretty common. An attacker attaches a malicious Word document to an email. This Word document has a macro, which can be used to then remotely access the host and install malware. The attacker gains persistence by exploiting vulnerabilities and moving to other systems. And finally, they steal data and accomplish their goal. Now let's walk through the same scenario and how it plays out if the business has an EDR solution in place like Cortex XDR for endpoint. So the Cortex XDR agent will prevent the exploit, malware, and malicious behaviors automatically right at the endpoint. The Cortex XDR agent collects rich endpoint data for analytics and investigation, and is then able to quickly determine root cause and quarantine those affected endpoints. So with continued innovation, the market is really moving towards consolidating more security tools, which is why XDR continues to be quite a buzzword. It extends detection and response beyond the endpoint. So let's take a deeper look. Cortex XDR builds upon the criticality of EDR, but further seeks to break down silos and consolidate tools. Our XDR solution was the first in the market, introduced back in 2018, and since then we've built a pretty large customer base. XDR helps to see and detect threats beyond the endpoint, managing all data and alerts in one view with automated stitching of alerts, cutting down investigation times. With Cortex XDR, you get the full capabilities. You can kind of see there on the circle of endpoint protection, endpoint detection and response, network detection and response, cloud detection and response, and user behavior analytics. There's no longer a need to have these product silos or search for and implement different types of tools, because XDR pulls these all together within one solution. And I just want to be clear, XDR is not just like these 4 different products that you purchase separately, but through one vendor. It is one solution. It's truly one product that provides all of those capabilities, but with better security, because we have the knowledge and ability to stitch together all this data to get a holistic view of your environment. So one of the most common questions I get asked is kind of, where do I invest? How can I figure out where I can invest in my endpoint security to meet the needs of my organization? And what solution is best for my organization? So let's talk a little bit about the options and where the market's going to help apply those best practices and kind of align those to your needs. So we talked about endpoint protection platforms. This is really offers one of the best types of protection for your business, in that it's a next-gen antivirus with additional endpoint security policies and modules in place. So that's a great start point if you currently have some type of antivirus and you really, really, really need to upgrade. But as we discussed, the most devastating attacks are really that 1% that can elude those defenses through different ways. And that is why detection and response capabilities are so critical. And that's why the market for EDR is really growing. As it takes those critical pieces of endpoint protection and offers the ability to detect and respond to those that bypass, in order to make sure that everything, across the organization is safe. And then if you're really looking for something more advanced, if you maybe already have some of the tools like network detection and response, and you really want to consolidate and get one view across your organization with all the cross data analytics, you really might want to be looking for XDR, thinking beyond EDR. It really provides the most prevention, detection, and response, and is able to kind of look beyond those attacks that are targeting just the endpoint, or attacks that bypass the endpoint and can still, move laterally within the organization. XDR will stop that. So, hopefully I provided a good overview of the different solutions that are out there, what you really need to look for when you are shopping for endpoint security solutions, and then hopefully you have a better idea of what the gaps are within your organization and what you should be looking for. EDR does provide the best path to XDR. So if you have not gotten there yet, you may want to look at that. But I know there are other businesses that are like, well, if XDR is the future, that is where I should be going now. So hopefully this was helpful. If you want to learn more about each of these solutions and maybe do a deeper dive into what is best for your organization, I certainly encourage you to reach out to us or your account manager, and we can certainly, help discuss through the options for you. But before we wrap up today, as they say, I suppose the proof is in the pudding, although I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. But, be able to see things in action and understand how they work, right? So we're going to examine some real world endpoint attacks that have happened within the past year and how Cortex XDR solution was able to stop them and prevent them. So the first attack we'll take a look at is the well-known Log4Shell attack that wreaked havoc right around the holidays at the end of last year. In December, a critical remote code execution (RCE) vulnerability in Apache's Log4j library was discovered and exploited in the wild. This vulnerability, known as Log4Shell, let a remote attacker execute arbitrary code on an affected server. So why did this vulnerability matter? Well, quick investigations revealed that this hack was actually pretty easy to perform. NIST scores vulnerabilities based on severity, and a day after the first exploits were found, NIST published an alert and assigned the vulnerability a score of 10, which is critical and the highest score possible, actually. The score of 10 was really a reflection of the fact that a large number of systems are using Java applications, and Log4j usage can be found pretty much everywhere. So the sheer scale at hand, a lot of organizations were exposed to this vulnerability, whether it be on their on-prem servers, both internet-facing and non-internet-facing, or cloud-hosted servers. The implications of this vulnerability, notwithstanding the potential costs organizations have to face to rebuild and remediate, but issues could range from downtime to information leakage to stolen credentials. And because this attack was so widespread and easy to execute, many attackers of all motivations were scanning for vulnerabilities to find and compromise servers. The good news is that if an organization had Cortex XDR in place, they were safe from exploits linked to Log4j vulnerabilities. The Cortex XDR agent provides several layers of comprehensive protections for endpoint attacks, including Log4Shell attacks. It helps block Log4Shell post-exploit activity with its behavioral threat protection, AI-driven local analysis, cloud-based malware analysis, and other security engines across Windows, Linux, and Mac systems. So exploit prevention is the most common, but using SQL query language to look for different application logs and logs ingested helps to see signs of exploitation attempts. We look at all data sources ingested, and this is the most common way to detect it. However, it can also be easily bypassed, and it is also hard to understand if there is a real exploitation occurring or if it's only an attempt and doesn't really prevent an attack. So Cortex XDR has been designed to block as many steps in the attack's lifecycle as possible, from the initial signs of reconnaissance and exploitation to the behaviors exhibited after a process is launched. But Cortex XDR also focuses on blocking attacks early in the life cycle, such as the exploit stage, to prevent subsequent infection and damage. For example, with Log4Shell, the Cortex XDR agent can stop post-exploit activity on Windows, Linux, and Mac systems, and it can also be proactively block the exploit itself. In this case, we detect there's a suspicious payload sent to the Log4j library, and we can block the activity even before the payload is executed using Java deserialization. Serialization is the process of turning some object into a data format that can be restored later, and people often serialize objects in order to save them to storage or to send as part of communications. Deserialization is the reverse of that process, taking data structured from some format and rebuilding it into an object. So today, the most popular data format for serializing data is JSON. Before that, it was XML. So to block the exploit, the approach uses Java deserialization. This approach helps to block the full exploitation chain on Linux endpoints. This is relevant for Log4j because when the attacker sends the data that is being translated into JVM, that Log4j reads and executes. It is being deserialized. And this is where Cortex XDR agent, Linux agent, looks for suspicious data that's being transferred. So Java deserialization exploits usually follow a standard pattern. If a code path ends up deserializing objects in memory by attacker-provided input, that code path can be leveraged for a remote code execution exploit. And in that case, two things must happen. A deserialization function or class must be called, and the deserialization function leads to either loading a class, running a process, or dropping a file, usually a web shell. The Cortex XDR agent hooks potential deserialization code paths and validates that no code execution happened afterwards, stopping deserialization exploits that lead to remote code execution, or RCE. The next endpoint attack that I want to take some time to analyze is the Kerberos snowpack attacks. This attack is not as well known as Log4Shell, but it is pretty notable as it enables attackers to gain full domain admin privileges within Active Directory environments. While Microsoft promptly issued a patch for these vulnerabilities late last year, as we all know, patching servers is often a slow process and many AD domains are left vulnerable. So let's look at this attack at a glance and why it matters. So Kerberos is a network authentication protocol that is primarily used in Active Directory environments, and it provides strong authentication by issuing tickets to allow access to services. Adversaries can leverage two vulnerabilities together to escalate to domain admin privileges from a standard domain user. So these two logical CVEs allow an attacker with low privileged domain user access to obtain a Kerberos service ticket for a domain controller computer account. This effectively enables an ordinary domain user to easily alleviate their privileges to domain admin. This attack was rather easy to execute, and thinking about the sheer number of Active Directory environments out there, we know it is a large number of organizations that could potentially be compromised. This vulnerability was also a bit overlooked at the time because most organizations were focused on the critical patching for the Log4Shell vulnerability. So how did Cortex XDR leverage different data sources to stop the NOPAC attacks? This example is a bit more unique because it is an example of where XDR shines due to the ability to ingest and analyze multiple sources of data beyond just the endpoint. So Cortex XDR fully detects these vulnerabilities as part of its identity analytics module. In addition, Cortex XDR also detects and blocks this attack, leveraging behavioral analytics at every stage of the attack chain due to the ability to stitch logs and data together automatically for effective cross-data analytics. So if you would have had Cortex XDR in place when these attacks happened and you became a target, you would not have to worry. So in wrapping up today, I just want to give a bit more advice to help make sure you are selecting the best endpoint security provider if you're currently in the market for a solution. Strongly take into consideration the key points we've gone over in this webinar around protection, detection, and response. How were they able to stop some of the most recent attacks? Ask these questions. What features do they have? In addition to answers they provide, seek solutions with additional industry third-party validation and independent testing. Some of the best examples are industry analyst reports, MITRE attack evaluations, and AV comparatives endpoint reports. Cortex XDR has a strong record across the board of validation and third-party testing. And finally, if you'd like to see Cortex XDR in action, I urge you to schedule a personalized demo. Contact your account manager or go directly to our website and request to be contacted. We would certainly love to show you all of the features and capabilities that Cortex XDR provides. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, great stuff, Yvonne. Appreciate the timeline of endpoint protection tools and the overview of attack types and their evolution and the detail on what Palo Alto can do to help with Cortex XDR, including the Log4j and NOPAC examples. Those were excellent. Really appreciate your insights today. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $300 Amazon gift card today is Katie Vreeland from Wisconsin. So congratulations to Katie. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto Networks for making this event possible, and thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.